Welcome back, everybody, to our QuaranSTREAMs Answers for COVID-19. As always, I'm one of your members at large on the Fairfax County School Board, Abrar Omeish, and I'm joined by...
I'm Kimberly Boateng, the student rep to the school board.
And we're really excited today to have some guests that we're going to hear from in just a bit. We have Armando Peri, who is our Ombudsman for our school system. And we also have Leona Van Smith, who is the director of our Equity and Family Engagement Office. So thank you guys so much for joining us. We'll be looping you guys in here just a second. We just wanted to make sure we provided a couple of updates for families. I know you guys have many questions, so let me just start with that as to what is happening next year and what to expect for those of us who are staff, employees, parents, students. There was a presentation that the school board had in a work session to present preliminary proposals as to what return to learn will look like, with, of course, the scenario of coming to school for certain portions of time with masks and social distancing and being very careful, and then also a virtual option. Staff are working really, really hard to give families options because we saw the survey results, which many families, over more than half of our families, over 75% of our families responded to the survey, giving us all sorts of opinions, and there really wasn't a majority. So I'll start with that. Happy to take questions later on about that. But did want to also say congratulations to our seniors. Virtual graduations are starting next week. We're very excited to be watching you starting Tuesday and then through the week. So congratulations to our seniors. A couple of reminders. So we still are in a situation where we have to make sure when we go outside, we wear our masks and take all the necessary precautions. As of 10 a.m. this morning, there are still nearly 14,000 cases that have occurred in Fairfax County. We have seen over 1,000 people who have been hospitalized. And as you all know, nearly 500 deaths, right? So this is not something to take lightly. And we know that in our community, there are hotspots where this is particularly affecting families. So regardless of seeing things open up, we have to make sure we mask up and avoid social contact as much as possible. We are under some pressure from the state, of course, to reopen. And Northern Virginia, we tend to have some of the higher critical need when it comes to this issue. So we have to be mindful that some of that guidance is delayed for us. Finally, I want to remind everyone, if you know anyone or you yourself need help with health insurance, food, child care, anything that is a social service that you might be able to benefit from our local nonprofits and local government programs, there is a phone number to call. It is our family coordinated services run by the county, and they'll direct you to the appropriate resource. That number is 703-222-0880. And for folks who want to learn a little bit more about the details of what they offer, we did do a stream a couple weeks back, so just feel free to check in the videos tab to find out a little bit more. With that, the school system is hoping to have some kind of decision about the final plan and some more specificity by the end of the month. And latest by July 23rd to have the finalized plans. So make sure you look out in your inboxes for some of those surveys that are going to be coming out for you to fill out your preferences. That's both for staff and families. With that, I'm going to go to Kimberly to give us an update on some of the exciting things that happened in the past few weeks and, of course, that are coming ahead.
Okay, so in terms of, so everyone's been hearing about, of course, the protest and what's been going on FCP, like in our neck of the woods, of course. And so I'm here to tell you a little bit of what FCP has been doing as a result of these protests and these uprisings. So on Tuesday night, the school board voted to change the name of Robert E. Lee High School, my school, for the 2020-21 school year. So later this summer, the new name will be chosen from different names that are suggested. And also there's some suggested names from the superintendent that include John Lewis, Barack Obama, Mildred Loving, Cesar Chavez, Legacy, and Central Springfield. But also to emphasize, like I said before, you can suggest names if you're within the Lee community, and I suppose also outside of the Lee community, but specifically the Lee community, of what names you would also want to see to be under consideration. And Fairfax High School has officially changed its team name from Rebel Pride to the Fairfax Lions to remove a reference to the Confederacy earlier this month. And on June 18th, the school board voted unanimously to recognize Juneteenth as a holiday for students and employees to celebrate the emancipation of slaves. There'll be a free Our Kids in Cages protest at the Farragut Square this Saturday at 3 p.m. And there will also be a March for Liberty and Justice for All on July 4th from 2 to 6 p.m. at the Black Lives Matter Plaza. So also just to emphasize what Abrar said, when you go out to these protests, make sure you make some noise, but also make sure that you mask up and stay safe because COVID-19 is still wreaking havoc in our communities and to our loved ones, and want to make sure that everyone still remains safe.
Thank you, Kimberly. And finally, before we go to our guests, just a reminder that FCPS has been providing meals throughout the year. Over 1.5 million meals have been distributed. It has been an immense effort, and we're very grateful to our staff who've made it happen and put themselves at risk to try to provide essential meals for our families. Finally, the ACT, FCPS will not be administering the ACT that was scheduled for July 18th. So be sure to wait for more information from the test administration company. But we do hope to come back in August to be able to administer the SAT. And as I mentioned, there are those options for schools. Feel free to ask questions, but we will await some more information from the superintendent about the details of that plan. All right, so without further ado, thank you so much, Armando and Leona, for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you guys to discuss a very essential topic for our school division for many years, but especially now as we all right, I'm back. Technical issues, it's our new normal. But yeah, so as we discuss equity, which of course is a critical topic, and not enough to just pay lip service to, but one that we want to make sure is a part of our thinking as we go back to school and administer any and all of our programs, of course. So so Armando, Leona, tell us a little bit about yourselves and about the offices that you represent here today. Yeah, I'm here. I know the video is kind of lagging, so go for it.
Well, I'll get started first. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here and talk about equity. It's the passion. It's what I get up for every day. And first and foremost, I get up and think about that because as a mother in FCPS, and that's first and foremost always on my mind. And I have children who attend FCPS. And so I think about the kind of school system they deserve and the kind of school system I experienced even as a child outside of FCPS. So I am here as your Director of Equity and Family Engagement, which is a new position in FCPS. I think I'm coming up on my 1-year anniversary. And so I get the honor of working within the Chief Equity Officer's sort of his department, and there's quite a few different offices in there. And I am in the Office of Professional Learning and Family Engagement. And I get the direct honor of serving and leading 3 very important teams. One is our Equity and Culture Responsive team. And so that is a group of individuals that do a lot of professional development for our teachers, for our leaders. They do coaching, they provide town halls. They are the boots on the grounds of helping us think and make decisions that have an equity mindset, not just a lens. We're moving away from this idea of a lens because you can take a lens off and you can put it back on. But when you have an equity mindset, it's your way of being. And so that's a primary charge of that group is how do we foster an equity mindset in all of our stakeholders, including our families and our students. I have 2 other groups I get the honor of working with, and that is the Title I team. And so we provide direct support to the 47 Title I schools in FCPS. And to be a Title I school, that means at least 55% of the population of students that attend that school are under the poverty line or receiving support through food and nutrition services or state services. And so we receive a grant from the federal government, and I help oversee that grant and provide supports to those schools to make sure that those opportunity and access gaps are not the driving force for those schools. And then finally, what's really near and dear to my heart, as I shared, is family and school partnerships. And as a mother, that's really important to me to think about how do we authentically engage our families in 2-way type of engagement. And so there's a lot of work that happens in family engagement, which includes our parent liaisons, our community liaisons, early intervention groups like our hippie group and our early literacy group, and just a lot of great work. And also thinking about how we engage our leaders in professional development of how to authentically engage our families in ways that maybe we haven't had to before, especially where we are now, has created another barrier of how we're really engaging families. So I'm excited to talk about any and all of those things tonight. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining. Armando, tell us about your department.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be here on your QuaranSTREAM. I love this new technology for reaching out to people. I'll probably talk a little bit about this, but I truly believe that information and knowledge is one of the most powerful tools to really ensure equity in our county. And so I think I applaud you all for thinking outside of the box on a way to reach out to families. This is just like Leona said, how important this work is to her. Just a little bit about myself to let you know how important this work is to me. I grew up here in Fairfax County and started out as a Latino student in kindergarten out at Greenbrier East Elementary School when there was not a lot of ESOL support for a kid who didn't speak a lot of English. So to be able to come into our schools and to have been blessed with the opportunity to go ahead and learn. And then I believe that my obligation is to come back and to try to help other families and to be able to access the same benefits that I was able to get to. And that's really what I'm excited about in my job as the Ombudsman. That's a term that a lot of folks are not familiar with. The Ombudsman's role is to be a resource to parents, to students, also to employees, anyone in our community who would like to have someone that they can talk to about how FCPS works so they can try to understand and brainstorm strategies if there's a problem or a concern that they have. So one of the roles that we do is we try to make sure that our constituents, whoever calls our office, has the information they need to be fully engaged, right? They know where to go, what their options are. And secondly, if they have a concern, help them brainstorm and help share strategies on how can you resolve, what are the steps that most people take to be able to resolve a problem. A lot of people feel overwhelmed. They think they don't have any power. They don't think that they know where to go. So our role is to try to level that playing field. Now, it's important to know that anybody who contacts us, whether it's on the phone or by email or through our website, what we offer is confidential support. So anyone who calls us, we make the commitment publicly that we will not share your information. We won't call your principal. We don't call anybody unless, of course, we do have some obligations. We have to keep kids safe. There's no way around that. And we want every child to be safe if anybody's in any kind of danger or if there's financial fraud. But otherwise, everything anybody calls and shares with us stays private. So it's a safe place to come and say, you know, I'm really angry about this. What can I do about it? And I don't go out saying, oh, so-and-so is really angry about this. That's not our role. Our role is just to be a safe place. That being said, we're also informal. So we're going to try to come up with as many strategies. Have you tried talking to this person? Have you thought about sharing it this way? So we try to share ideas. And then finally, we don't have any authority. So we're impartial. I'm not here to protect anybody, whether it's the caller or FCPS. The role is purely to say, here's how our system works, and here are steps that you can take. And then finally, as people contact us, what we'll do is we share trends without sharing identities. We share trends with the school board. We share trends with our school leadership to say, these are the things our office is hearing about. And here are some problems that we think we need to address and that we encourage our system to address to try to get in front of problems so that they don't become even bigger.
Yeah, thank you so much, Armando, for explaining that. And Leona, of course, it's extremely important for our community to know that, you know, the Ombudsman office operates separately, so it doesn't have that information sharing that you would worry about. I know for anyone, you know, approaching the system, you might think that's the system anyway. Of course, they're going to share. Of course, they're going to tell, and I could get, you know, retaliated against or something. But it's very important to keep in mind that those offices are separate. And okay, here we go. Technical difficulty again. I'm trying to join you guys again, but I'm still here. So maybe Armando, you guys hear me? Okay, good. If you can speak a little bit to some of the trends that you are seeing. You know, one of the realities that we saw is, okay, are we good? Yeah, okay, sorry. One of the
Oh, seems like we lost you. Well, while she's rejoining us, Mr. Perry, do you want to like speak to how I think she was asking about like the trends of
Yeah,
what we've been
shares.
seeing? Oh, I heard you for a second, Abrar, then I lost you again.
Oh man. Okay. Um,
So if you like, I
you guys
can
hear
start
me?
talking
I'm so
about
sorry.
trends if that, oh, there you go, you're back. Okay.
I see you now. Yeah.
There we go. I think my computer is overheating. I'm so sorry. But yes, let's talk a little bit about the trends, and then we'll go into defining equity. What even is that? So maybe Leona, you can take that one. So Armando, please go ahead.
Absolutely. So we're keeping in mind that we are now in our second year open. So last year in the 2018-2019 school year, we received almost 400 contacts from the community, mostly parents, but some students and a handful of employees. And we had some topics that were of the utmost concern or that were the most common calls that we received. Special education was certainly one of them. And for that reason, we were very fortunate that the previous board authorized the addition of an assistant ombuds for special education. So we have someone on staff and our team who has over 20 years of experience. Ms. Dawn Clements, she's been a special education teacher. She's been a PSL. She knows special education inside and out. So she is really a wealth of knowledge for anyone who calls, whether it's a parent or a student or a community member who may have questions about IEPs or special education services. That really was one of the most common themes that we received. And if I were to break it down a little bit, it was the concern that parents felt being overwhelmed by the IEP process. If anyone who's ever sat in a meeting knows how incredibly important they are, how serious they are, but sometimes they can feel very overwhelming for a parent, a lot of jargon, a lot of language that parents aren't always familiar with. Not everyone is a special education teacher, and we're talking about their child, the person who is the most important person in their world. And we're talking about a child who may be struggling in school. So for parents, the IEP process can be very overwhelming. Another issue that was very common was about school environment. How welcome do I feel in my school? How is communication done in my school? And am I welcome there? Do people accept my thinking? Do I have a voice in my school community? And trying to help parents strategize how they can express their thinking in a way that's productive and positive and helpful to their child. So school environment was another. And the third that I'll share, the third big bucket was behavior and discipline. And it was about the serious impact that discipline consequences can have for students, parents feeling whether or not the discipline process is fair and equitable, and what opportunities are there to go from a punitive discipline model to a growth model. I like to say, when I used to be a principal, that our role was to help students learn not only to read and to write and to do arithmetic, but also to learn respect. And how do we engage with others and behave in a way that's respectful of ourselves, respectful of others, and respectful of our surroundings. So those were the three bucket areas. They still continue to this day. We do have employees contacting us now. We started in October accepting calls from employees. And there the calls tend to be a little bit more about benefits. What options do I have? If I'm interested in growth opportunities, or if I don't feel that someone is treating me in a fair way, how can I work towards some resolution there? So those tend to be the big ticket items that come across our office.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for explaining the trends. And I think those are particularly important to touch on some of the areas where we've seen perhaps lacking equity, right? And whether it's discipline or treatment in school, we've heard, especially from our student community. I know, Kim, you've made it loud and clear, and we've heard from many of your friends. So let's break that down. We like to do key terms in our calls sometimes to help our public get a grasp of the subject matter. So equity, it's different than equality. So Leona, help us break that down for us.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was going to say. Before we move on, it's really important that we talk about that equity and equality are not the same thing. And the word equity gets thrown around a lot around, oh, we're not looking at this with an equity lens if we don't give this group the same thing. And that's not what equity is. And there is a place for equality There's many places in school systems and across our nation where equality is still an important conversation, but equity is different. Equity is ensuring that every child gets what they need. And I love this graphic I'm going to try to show because I've seen lots of different graphics. This one really, really stood out to me. Let's see if I can show it to you. All right. Do you see this graphic I have on here? And what I love about this graphic, on the left side is equality, right? Different types of plants. They're all getting the exact same thing. Hooray for us. We're watering them all. We're giving them sun. And they might be growing. And eventually, these are different types of plants, and some are going to grow in different places. Some of them may not have ever been designed to grow in a sunny environment. Equality, equity is not everybody growing, it's everybody thriving. And so on this side, you see the plants are thriving because we've now differentiated our resources, our approach. We took the time to understand the way that these different plants work and grow and the type of soil and nurturing they need. And now everybody's thriving. So this is really important to me, this idea that equity creates a place where students thrive. And we really break down barriers and try to figure out what can we mitigate? What do we need to learn? And it might be changing structures, like changing the pot. It might be changing conditions around, like more sunlight, more water. It may be changing the supports. You know, some plants as they grow, they need that little stick on to the side of them because they get tall and they get wobbly, right? So I like this because it kind of connects it in a way that people can understand. I've seen other graphics. There's so many out there where there's, you know, children riding bicycles all trying to get to the same place. And some people think, oh, let's just put them in different places on the finish line. Really, equity be about giving them the bike that fits them, whether it's a two-wheeler, a three-wheeler, a motorcycle. That's the difference of equity. So when we talk about equity in FCPS, what I think about every day is, how do we get this on this side? How do we make it so that everyone is thriving? And where does the work have to happen? And I think that's what makes it overwhelming. It has to happen everywhere. And so that takes some time. And where do we start? So that's sort of what's on my mind every day.
Yeah, thank you so much for outlining that for our community. And of course, in the education space, right, that can translate to, you know, how do you meet a student who may have a disability or an emotional or a learning delay, right? Versus a student who may come with traumatic experiences and may not have a disability, but has experienced some tough situations in their life. Or a child who may not have either of those things, but grew up in an environment where his parents or her parents are really pressuring them, right? And pushing them to get good grades. And so the stress is a little bit overwhelming for them. So differentiating that learning, absolutely, with an equity lens. Okay, so Kimberly, I know we wanted to cover a little bit of the equity pieces here that we had. If you want to jump in, go ahead and do so. Otherwise, we can continue with our next portion. So
you can continue for now. I think I'm all right.
Okay. So in terms of how these things translate in our school community, right? So we have our students, we have our employees. Armando, you know, you spoke a little bit about how we now have an ombudsman for both. For the average person who's just trying to understand all of this, what are some of the changes that have already existed? What can they see in their own school community as to some of the efforts that have been put forth? I have some ideas, but I'll give you guys the opportunity to outline some of it.
Do you want to hear specifically some changes that we've done this year? Mm-hmm. I think some of the changes that have occurred, really, Kimberly did a great job of naming some concrete things recently. You know, it's unfortunate that sometimes that it took, you know, very visible hate crime in order for us to move a little faster. But prior to that, I was proud of some of the work we were doing. Some of the things that have occurred this year is we have some required professional development for everybody in FCPS. And we call them our cultural proficiency modules or professional development. We are on module, coming up this school year, we'll be on module 6 and 7. So we've done 5 total. And when I talked earlier about lenses versus mindsets, again, to put a lens on, that's easy to do. You read a quote, oh, your heart, oh, that quote really resonates with me. I'm on board for that day. Or, oh, I watched this video and, oh, that doesn't sit well with me. And then you go on about your life and you forget about it, you take your lens off. To have an equity mindset requires long-term growth thinking. And so that's what we've been doing. And we've been building up. So we started in module 5 of what are our guiding questions of what cultural proficiency is? What does it mean to be responsive? What does it mean to learn about what culture is and how that impacts me in my everyday? And then we started to build upon that. So if I understand culture, can I understand how I might unintentionally be biased in the way I identify with the world and make assumptions that everybody sees me the same way? So we kind of moved through that in module 2. In module 3 and 4, we started to identify where are the places where this shows up in the classroom? Where are the places that this shows up in the way I teach and the way I plan? It's no secret that the American school system is built off of a dominant culture, which includes some Eurocentric type of curriculum. That's where we are right now, and we're trying to change that. But that takes some time to get people to understand that the way in which maybe you learn or what you learn might not be relevant to everyone. So most recently, that's what our 2 professional developments were this year. One was understanding how your own bias and how the curriculum kind of puts a different lens that you don't want to have on you in the way in which you teach. And so we provided some tools for teachers when they're planning, some guiding questions to ask themselves to dig deeper. We've had professional learning communities in Fairfax County forever. Armando can tell you we were both teachers and principals in FCPS, and we've been talking about professional learning communities. And that work needs to grow too. And so we try to connect to professional learning communities to say, that's still a good thing to think about the 4 big guiding questions. What do we want students to know? How will we know? What will we do when they know it? But now let's add additional, let's go deeper. What do I need to learn about myself before I think about what kids need to learn? How do my own biases contribute to what I choose as an activity? How do my own biases contribute to the way in which I engage kids and who I call on? And so that was the 5th module that we had this year, was around, we defined the word bias. And that took us a while to get there. And I would probably say there are some folks that say, you're not moving fast enough. But I want us to go back to the idea of a lens versus a mindset. And mindset change takes some time. You've got to dig deep in. You've got to spend the time learning and practicing and seeing how it connects. And so that's what module 5 was. We took a look at discipline disproportionality and we defined bias. And we talked about how when we make decisions every day, we are biased in our decisions. And bias isn't always bad. Sometimes bias can keep you safe in a quick moment. But it's that unconscious bias that is sustained. If we don't check it, our decisions will always be that other picture I showed you, good for some, but not good for all. So we introduced the staff to a tool this year. We called it our Culture Proficiency Continuum of Decision Making. So we gave them some ideas. If you make a decision, if you were on the left side of the continuum, this is what that decision might look like. For example, a student's late to class, and my decision is to say, you're tardy, where have you been? Go get a late slip. That's going to be on the left side of the continuum. Where on the right side of the continuum, that might look like, hey, what's going on at home? Let me understand more about your story. Okay, that's why you're late to class. What can I do to help you get to class? So helping them understand that. And then finally, this next school year, as we move on to new modules, we were going to start to address racism and hate and go into that bias even deeper. And then the other thing I'll add, in addition to the modules, we've done a lot of work of trying to build the capacity of teachers in our building. So we have something called equity leads at every school. And I will say there's a spectrum there too. These are teachers or counselors or somebody who's committed, but they have a full-time role anyway. So they're still teaching kids, and they come to professional development with us 4 times a year. And we help build their capacity to help us give this professional development, but also to start conversations, to create an equity team in their building, to create and work with their administrators to say, where can we get this work started? We've given them some self-assessment tools. We've given them professional reading. We give them a toolkit. We have a Google site where they can go and read articles to get them synergized to have these courageous conversations. We gave everyone a tool this year about how to have a courageous conversation. We call it our compass. And maybe later I can show that because I don't want to do all the talking. And so the compass is a really good tool of how we have these conversations. We've done a lot more than that. I'm really excited about the work, and we have a ton more to do. So we are not done, but those are just 2 highlights.
Thank you so much, Leona. I really, really appreciate you covering that. It's very important for folks to know. And I want to touch on, I know Kim's going to touch on implicit bias in a bit here. and even identifying it in ourselves. I do want to pull you in, Armando, if you want to add anything to that, or certainly even build on what your observations are in terms of bias that you've heard about, and being very real about our system, right? We're a huge system and we have incredible diversity, and the fact of the matter is that we do have these challenges, right? So please help us get a sense from your perspective, what you hear and what you see.
Right. Well, thank you. I think you're right. I used to use the expression that it's moving a system as large as Fairfax County Public Schools. I mean, think about the scope, almost 190,000 students, I think 24,000 employees, 14,000 plus teachers. It's not a big ship, it's a whole fleet of ships that we're trying to move in a positive direction. And I think sadly, because of recent events, the destination has been more clearly defined to say, where we are is not where we should be. We shouldn't be satisfied where we are, that we need to improve as a school system and recognize that moving everyone, an entire school system in that direction, there are going to be some people who are going to be in speedboats and they're going to move and they're already there waiting for us to join them. And there are others who are a little bit bigger, slower ships. And it takes a little bit more, and we need some clear guidance on directing that ship in the right direction. And I think that's where leadership comes in. And so I think to be able to have those very difficult but very important conversations, and Leona's office is providing the staff development to let people do that in a safe way. When you look at our screen of just these 4 presenters, we are 4 very different people, and we each bring talents and experiences, positive and negative experiences that we should be able to share, but that's hard to do. And so we have to open ourselves up, but we have to make sure that it's a safe place for employees and for parents and for students to be able to share their thinking and their experiences. One area of awareness that I'm very happy to be a part of is the last school board charged the chief equity officer in my office to develop a religious observances task force. And the idea being, to be very honest, we have always had a Christian-centric calendar. If you look at the holidays that are religious holidays, spring break is always near the period of Easter, of Holy Week and Easter. And then we have winter break is always around the time of Christmas. And there are other communities and other religious faiths that students are often, and employees are often stuck having to choose. Do I stay home or do I go to my place of worship for this important part of my identity and miss this instruction that's happening at school, or miss this test that's happening that I'm then going to have to work doubly hard to try to make up for? And so many of our students of faiths that are not Christian faiths have been at disadvantages and have had to make very difficult choices. And I should say employees as well. We have teachers who want to observe their religious the days of significance, but they're afraid of leaving their children because they know that what they bring to their students is so very important. And so I'm very happy that the calendars that you get to look at now include religious faith observances for other faiths, the other major faiths. I think it would be hard with a 180-day school day to say we're going to observe every holiday or every religious day. We can't, but we can say this is how important it is that we're going to start down this path to look at adding these significant days, these important days into our calendar so that our staff are mindful. Why is it, if my students are out for this day and we're going to be out, how does that inform my understanding of my school community? I'll give you a personal example. The fact that the superintendent and the school board gave us the day of Juneteenth off, that was an opportunity for me and for my family to enjoy time together. Well, we're already together. We're already here quarantined at home, but to be focused on how can we learn about an experience that is different from our own, not better, not worse, different. Right. And so that was an opportunity. And I think that if we were to have Diwali as a holiday, or Eid al-Fitr as a holiday, or Rosh Hashanah as a holiday, while those may not be my faith traditions, it's an opportunity for me to say, this is important. and I have an opportunity to learn about it.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you touching on that. I mean, certainly as a kid, I will just be entirely candid. That was my own experience. I grew up in this system. My youngest sibling, my brother, is still in the system, and that is an ongoing struggle. And I know that faith communities have united and been, you know, vocal about this for a while. I'm encouraged that we see change coming, hopefully. But I'll be so honest that it's such a part of a person's identity to feel that, you know, this is not important enough. That everyone in my circles cares about this, but somehow my school, my teacher, my principal just doesn't care enough, and I have to choose. And I mean, yeah, anyway, we even have, you know, certain elementary schools will have over 50% absence on these days, but it's still persisted that it hasn't changed the calendar. So that brings me to urgency. Let's talk a little bit about urgency. We received, you know, Kim was sharing some of the Facebook feed messages here. She shared it privately because it was a passionate parent, but I did want to touch on that, right? So a lot of folks are hearing from the top, this is what we care about. We care about equity. These are our values. And certainly things that I know you guys have devoted your lives to and are working on right now. But then in how it translates, and this is part of what you touched on already, Armando, but maybe their in-person experience isn't like that, right? Maybe they feel that someone said a racial slight, or that the holiday isn't recognized, right? So that structurally, or as an employee, you know, maybe certain things are not valued, or their superiors don't understand some of their experiences or accommodate some of their needs. I've certainly heard this, I mean, with a lot of things related to like prayer and things like that. But I'd love to, you know, hear your message to the community about, or, you know, whether we feel a sense of urgency or not, and how someone who is experiencing a lot of frustration and feels they may have come forward to their principal, to their teacher, to whoever, and not had that be addressed. So where what do we say to them?
I definitely think the time of urgency has like no other time before. It was urgent to me the day I took this job. And I'll be honest, I don't know that everyone felt the same urgency I felt, right? I felt like I was doing a lot of pushing and posing and asking questions. And so recently, of course, it feels extremely urgent now. Just with all candor, our office is the most important office in the world now. And it should have been from day one. And so I feel hopeful, you know, despite the ugliness of hate that occurred, and that now there's this acknowledgement that equity and also addressing racism, hate, anti-Semitic, all of those things, that should be the core of our work in addition. So one of the things that we've begun to embark on literally just this week, and today was day 2 of it, myself and my team, along with some folks from Family and School Partnerships, we are a leadership team through a process by which we're trying to create some goals around creating an anti-racist school system. And so we are, you know, taking a look. We know that we don't own the strategic plan alone, that we co-own that with you, but we can come to you with some suggestions. And so we took some time just this week on Tuesday and this morning to say, here's what we say we aspire to. And I was really honest with them and said, but here's our status quo. And we had about a page and a half of status quo that has been status quo in FCPS forever. Things that people know about, and then things that people don't know about. Like there's the overt things that everyone is aware of, like discipline disproportionality and advanced academics and access to rigor and TJ and hiring. Those are overt. But then there's those subtle things that have been status quo in FCPS for far too long. We're not looking at hiring across all of our offices. Why not? That should happen everywhere. It's not just Black teachers and Latino teachers we need. We need them in central office. We need them on our leadership team. We need them all over FCPS for that diverse perspective. Other places is how people have to shed their identity to come work for us. What does it look like to join the culture of FCPS? So we spent a lot of time unpacking that and saying, if this is our aspiration, for example, we're going to pass out all these laptops to kids. That's great. But have we changed our practices to ensure that staff has professional development and know how to do engaging instruction for kids? And does our curriculum match? And so there is urgency around looking at our curriculum and integrating an anti-bias, anti-hate, anti-racist curriculum for kids, as well as professional development for staff. So we are working on a plan with our leadership team. I do feel strongly that we all have to own this together. This is not just the work of the equity office. If equity is at the center, then everyone owns a part of it. From the school board down to the classroom teacher, we all have to put the work in. I will say to anyone who's experienced something where you feel like you were not heard and not seen, you do need to speak up. Our school system is so large and we're not hearing all of the stories. And so if something happened to you and you attempted to go, obviously always to the principal first, and you don't feel that you didn't feel heard or seen, or you're not sure and I'm gonna just name it, what was justice for you, reach out. There's other people to talk to. There are region offices. We have our Ombudsman, Armando, to help you think through that. I have people who call me to talk through that. I don't have that same confidential lens because often I try to pull everyone together, like, let's just talk about this. But I encourage people to not just sit. We can't do better until we know better. And so we are so large, trying to pull all those stories together. The more stories we have, the more truth we have, the better we are. So there is urgency. There is a plan being crafted. It will start on July 22nd and 23rd when we will host something called our Equity Symposium. It'll be our third one. I think we sent you an invitation to come. And we plan to talk about, our theme this year is Beyond Words. We've been talking about equity forever. We've been talking about closing achievement gaps forever. What are we going to do about it? And then it will move forward with these ideas we'd love to present as some action items from our perspective of how to dismantle the status quo in FCPS.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot to touch on there. I'll stay quiet lest I cause some trouble here. So Kim has a question for us to help folks learn about how to improve themselves. So Kim, please.
Yes, so I have a question for both Ms. Smith and Mr. Peri. So I'm going to start with Ms. Smith, of course. So implicit bias is actually something I've talked a lot about when I'm on the board. And I'm not sure, I think we touched on it a little bit. If not, feel free to kind of dive more into it and kind of touch on how to first be aware of implicit bias and how to get past it. Of course, I always speak about myself. People think that implicit bias is something that I may not have it. I even have it myself. And it's a constant battle every day to make sure that I'm aware of it and making sure it's not constantly influencing my actions. So what advice or instruction do you have for people who are actively wanting to be aware of their implicit bias and how to be aware of how it's affecting their actions and kind of move past it, their own bias?
That's a great question. And we did do not a lot. We've done some work on bias this year, and we started with the leaders of the building because they need to model this. And then we went to the staff, and we even talked about what does bias look like, for example, even in hiring people. And so one of the things we did was to actually pull out sample interview questions that somebody might ask and kind of do an exercise to say, can you find the bias in this? And there were a lot of people that couldn't. They just couldn't, right? And so we had to engage in exercises like that to say there are many places in which these questions were going to lead you to choose a certain person every time. We did some exercises like take a look at your staff. How many of them have the same attributes as you? So I say all that to say that bias starts with self-reflection. What kind of self-reflection tools can you do? So that was an example of some self-reflection tools we did with our principals around bias and hiring, but any person can do some self-reflection. You can ask yourself, who do I engage with? What books do I read? What do I watch? Who do I follow on social media? Who do I engage with? When I'm out and about in a store, do I feel comfortable with other people? When someone says something, do I get offensive quickly or do I pause to understand it? I really think that bias starts with personal reflection and being really intentional to ask yourself questions. And I so appreciate what you said, Kimberly, is that what we're also trying to not do is make everyone feel like you're a bad person, right? People shut down when they hear that. What we are trying to teach people to say is that bias exists. It is your brain's way of creating shortcuts. It's biologically there. Your brain creates shortcuts to say, oh, this equals this, because that's what my experience told me. And until you check yourself, your brain will keep making those shortcuts for you. We get so much input all the time coming at us. We have so much stimulus from social media and our friends and TV. And so our brain has to make sense of it. So it makes these shortcuts. Unfortunately, those shortcuts create biases. And we begin to attach that shortcut to everything. So, oh, I saw this movie where this happened, so I'm going to make an assumption that happens all the time. So what I would suggest, and again, just in summary, is it starts with self-reflection. It might even be a self-assessment of yourself, and then having questions you pose to yourself all the time. And then finally being okay to say, I am biased. Now that I own that, give yourself permission, write yourself a note, you're biased, but you're okay, and then do something about it.
Thank you so much for saying that. I think that's very important because a lot of people think, when I also spoke to that, a lot of people feel as if they get super defensive when talking about bias because they want to be like, oh no, I'm not like that. And to kind of start the conversation that having bias does not inherently make you a bad person, but in order to be a better person, we need to always be thinking about the bias. And for Mr. Peri, I have a question. It's about listening, I guess. So what I mean by that, a lot of people, basically a lot of people have been learning a lot about the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot about different racial injustices and inequities throughout the whole world. And they've been learning a lot. And I have a question, like, how do you listen effectively? How do you listen in terms of actually absorbing the information? Because I know a lot of times what I've seen in the past weeks has been people are listening, but they're also listening in terms of trying to like rebuttal. How do you listen objectively and trying to actually obtain information as opposed to listening for the sake of, that's cool, but let me try to put this into.
Kimberly, that is a great question, because what often happens is we get two people who feel very strongly about their experience, and they both often engage in exactly what you're talking about, which is listening to defend or listening to explain, when what they should be doing, I think, is listening to understand. Understand doesn't mean I agree. It simply means that I understand what you're feeling or thinking. And so if I were going to offer people that were having a conversation a strategy, I would say the first thing is, first of all, let the person talk, right? Because we tend to jump in and we interrupt, and we see it in the news media, we see it all over the place. So let the person talk. And as you listen to them, listen not to, if you find yourself saying, no, wait, let me tell you why you're wrong about that. Now I'm listening to defend, and that's not going to work. Instead, if you can use a skill that we hear about all the time called paraphrasing, if you can say, all right, Kimberly, you and I are having a conversation, and you tell me a couple of points, your feelings, you talked about Black Lives Matter. You mentioned a couple of ideas or experiences or thoughts about the topic. Instead of me telling you what I think, if I can instead very briefly repeat and show you that I heard you, not that I agree, I may not, I might, but that I instead understood what you just told me. If I can repeat the key ideas back, first of all, that lets you know that I heard you. Secondly, it shows that I was listening to understand. And now you are going to be open to listening to me, right? And so then I should be then sharing my thoughts, and then you paraphrase back. And then when I can show you that I understand what you've told me, not agree, but I understand, and you understand me, we can find those commonalities. We each shared 5 ideas, and you know what? 3 of them were the same. We're not that far apart. Let's spend our time talking about the 2 things where maybe we're a little bit farther apart, right? So I would say that would be a strategy to paraphrase or to kind of repeat, summarize, if you will, what the other person said. It proves that you were listening, and that way you're not thinking about, because when you're thinking about your defense or your answer, you're really not listening to the other person. I want to, if I may, take a second to jump back to Leona's idea, because she had such great thoughts. I would say I absolutely agree with her to recognize that bias is usually lack of understanding, what we were just talking about. But I also want to add, sadly, there are very small populations in our community that do feel hate. And the vast majority of people are just lack of understanding. I've never had that kind of food, or I've never known anybody from that country or that religious group. That's bias. But when we find examples of hate, I think we need to create environments in our schools, in our community, where people can, in a safe way, call it out. And if it means having friends that I can share it with, as I'm concerned because I'm hearing this kind of language or this kind of graffiti in our school, how do we stand up to say, this is wrong, and we as a school community won't accept it? It's going to happen. There are going to be people who are going to go beyond lack of understanding and lack of experience to, for whatever reason, whether I've been taught or my life experiences, I hate a particular group. And I think that we've got to create an environment where students, staff, and parents can call it out in a way that's going to say, that's not welcome here. So just wanted to add that.
Might I offer a strategy, and this might help anybody who's wondering how to have this conversation. I have a tool I'd like to show. If I can share my screen again.
Yes, Leona, please. We actually just received a question from an equity
yay.
lead. Yeah.
Okay, well, let me show you. And the equity lead probably has seen this, but I'm going to remind them again. This tool really works, and it speaks to Armando's piece too. So give me a moment to share.
That was actually perfect timing. I thought you'd seen the question. That's excellent.
So we call this our compass. And when people come to a conversation that's hard, they're going to come at it at one of these 4 quadrants. And they're either going to come at it from a moral stance. This is just right or wrong. How can you not understand that? They're going to come from it, or maybe from a feeling stance that I'm angry or I'm upset. How do you not know that? They might come from it from a social stance, like, why aren't we doing something? I'm ready to march today. Or they might be coming from a, I don't understand, I need to research. And so when we can take the time to recognize it's okay to be in any of these quadrants, they can help you have some empathy about where somebody is in their thinking. Another way to think about that is we have like some guiding questions about what that is. So again, if you're in the moral section and you hear about, let's say, Black Lives Matter, it might be morally, you know that that is right, and anything beyond that is wrong. And so that might be where you sit. But maybe you might be angry about that. You might think, well, what do you mean? Don't I matter too? You might be in the feelings place. You might be thinking like, where did this even come from? I don't even understand how that came to be. And you might need to do some research. Or you might be in a social place of like, absolutely Black Lives Matter, and we should paint that on every school building in Fcps. If we take the time to recognize where somebody is, then you can coach or provide questions to put them into the other quadrants. So you're feeling this way about this movement. And maybe you want to help them to learn. So you might want to push them to the thinking quadrant. What can we read to help you understand? Or what resources or data or research can I provide you? Or maybe you have somebody that's in the feelings and they don't know what to do, and you want to help them go to the doing quadrant. And so if you recognize where you are yourself, it helps you come to a conversation knowing, although I might be in the doing, I need to honor and respect somebody might not be there with me. And how do I bring them along? So we really rely a lot on this tool. This is adopted from Courageous Conversations, which is used nationally to have conversations about race. And so we have used this tool with our principals. We've shared this tool with our equity leads. But I really, and most recently, after the murder of George Floyd, we had a principal session where we talked to every single principal about this, and we led them through this as well. Just that we all have to practice understanding people are going to come to this in different ways, and so are we.
Yeah, thank you, Leona. I know we have just 5 minutes left here together, so I want to pivot to something that addresses a couple of the questions we saw, Micheline and others. Thank you for asking. Regarding language. So we live in a county with over 160 languages. It's incredible, really. We have representation from nearly the whole world. And in our school communities, we see that. Even though our county is not quite majority minority, we're almost there, our school system is. And many of our families speak a different language at home. So on top of course, the population that is learning English in our schools. So I am curious for both of you, if you can speak a little bit to how we're trying to bridge that gap and where some of the remaining gaps are. Because I'll tell you, as a board member, I see some areas where it's not necessarily prioritized, or sometimes we forget that there are entire chunks of our population who don't speak English. or aren't even tech savvy enough to connect, right? Or don't speak legalese, right? Let alone English. I'd love for you guys to comment a little bit on that. I know we have 8 critical languages that we try to provide material in, but for both of you, Armando, how can folks reach you? Let's simplify it a little bit for them. And then Leona, more broadly speaking, what are our intentions and hopefully action items moving forward to connect with some of these families, especially in a tough time like right now?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I think for our office, we work very closely with our translation services. So any parent that contacts us, any student who may not feel comfortable talking about it in English, we will do a 3-way phone call with a translator. We will do whatever we can, but we are also open to that. If it's hard for us to find your particular language, we're open to if you have somebody in your family or that you can trust, that you feel comfortable, we should encourage our families to do that. It's about I said it at the very beginning of our conversation, the importance of knowledge and information, whatever it takes for you to get that information. I agree with you that is one of the big issues that I think impacts our discipline. When we have parents who maybe culturally come from a place where you offer reverence and respect to school, and whatever school says, I accept. And some of our parents know what their rights are when it comes to discipline. And I'm talking specifically about out of school suspension. Knowing that, everybody should know that if your child has engaged in some type of behavior that was against our rules, there are consequences, but that you have a right as the parent to participate in that. And if you don't believe that the consequence, an out of school suspension, is appropriate or just, you have the right to appeal that decision and talk to the principal about it. And I think that what sometimes happens, and it's not out of not maliciousness, but it's, again, going back to that bias. I've sent a letter. Here's the information. It's your responsibility to get that translated into whatever language you read, legalese or otherwise. But also, we often are, and as a former principal, and Leona's, I'm sure, been in this spot too, when we have to reach out to a parent whose language we don't speak to say, here's what happened. And sometimes the folks that we ask to translate for us may not always translate the information about appeals. And I think that's something that, honestly, we're accountable to folks. And as the principal, if I think that what your child did was serious enough that results in this kind of consequence, I should be able to have that conversation with you about it. And we should be able to talk about it. So that'll be something to think about.
Thank you, Armando. I'm going to approach it from that global lens. One of the reasons I took this job was that I'm noticing as we become more diverse in lots of ways, whether it's religious, socioeconomic, race, some of our practices haven't caught up. And one of those is the way we translate, to be quite honest. And so it wasn't malintended, but years ago, that same little team, which actually doesn't even sit in my office or where you would think it sits, hasn't grown much either. And so, and we also don't have currently, although we're working on it now that many of us are coming together because we value this, we don't have any clearly defined rules of what should get translated beyond special ed, because there's legal ramifications. But you shouldn't have to have a legal ramification to want to engage and inform. And so most recently, COVID really it has shown us the need to communicate in many languages. We're putting out messages weekly to families, and some get translated and some don't, whether it's from the division level or down to the school level. And so there's been a team of us across many offices, because translation doesn't necessarily sit in one place, right? How can we create some decision-making rules? So we're working on that. Can we expand the scope of, it's a really small group of people that do written translations versus those that do oral translations. Quite honestly, we need more. I'm just being upfront. We don't have enough. And then where can we leverage other things like other systems are doing, such as phone lines or places where you can call in. And so during COVID, we got together and used different sources of funds. And we expanded. We have a phone line that we really reserved previously in cases in which we didn't have a translator. And it was hard to get access to that if you were principal. And so several of us across the ESOL office and family and school partnerships and communication said, that needs to be available to everybody so that they can communicate with families. And so we pushed on that, and we came together with an agreement around that, and some funds were allocated to give access to that phone line to principals that they didn't have before. So I'll say that I don't think there was no malintent. It's just that some of our processes haven't grown in the way our needs have grown. And so that's where we have to just be honest and say, hey, we need to grow up. We need to do a little better, especially, I think, for sure, in the era of translations. You can't be engaged if you're not informed. So we are working on it, and that's actually been a hot topic the last 2 or 3 weeks from us.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I've certainly seen the heightened understanding of the need, right? The need's always been there, but especially with COVID, people now are waking up to that. So thank you for outlining that. So as we close here, how can folks contact you, and what are your final thoughts to the community before we end our stream together?
I'm happy to give my email address out. I don't know what's a good way. I don't want to just like put it out in case someone wants to see it visually.
Yeah, go ahead and say it, and we'll also edit the description. We always do this, folks, with the specific information. So
sure. So again, it's Leona Smith-Vance, and I'm in the Office of Professional Learning and Family Engagement. It's L as in Leona, the letter M, Smith, so LM Smith, and the digit 3, LM Smith 3 at fcps.edu. You can contact me anytime. I know we probably didn't get to all types of questions tonight, and I'm happy to dialogue with anybody. We know we have more work to do to think about all types of cultures and marginalized groups that don't see themselves reflected, whether it's Native Americans, whether it's, we know we need work to do on our curriculum and also making sure students get seen. And so I'm happy to have that dialogue with anybody.
I'd say for us, the easiest way is you can always give us a call in the office of the Ombudsman. It's 571-423-4014. I even did my high-tech printout of our email address there, because people say, how the heck do you spell Ombudsman? It's OMBUDSMAN at fcps.edu. And I know that Kimberly or Abrar, you're probably going to put it on there in fancy lettering, but I went old school here. And we're happy to talk to anyone, any question about FCPS. Reach out. It's the safe place to do it in our office. Even if you just want to brainstorm and just understand, is what the things that I've heard, is it true? Is this what somebody's allowed to do? Is a teacher allowed to do that? And if they are, we'll explain to you where that information, where the regs or the policy are. And if not, we'll help you figure out how to get things better.
Thank you guys so much, Armando, Leona. Really appreciate you guys coming on today. Y'all heard from some of our best people here today. So I really appreciate the work you're doing. Look forward to continuing to partner with you more actively in the weeks and days and months ahead. And for our viewers, you guys know we're on 7 p.m. Thursdays and Sundays every week, except if it's a holiday. This next session is going to be about the environment, to learn a little bit more about what's being done and what you can do to make sure that you're not complicit in hurting our planet. With that, we will see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.